Amazing. Love it. Hey, I bought 3 coffees last Sunday. Guess how much it cost me? More than $15. More than $17. $20. I took a photo of the receipt because I wanted to show you to prove it, but I can show you on my phone later. I didn't put it up on the screen. $20! I was like, I used to work in the coffee industry, and I was about to go up and say, excuse me, you've got this wrong. I've only got 1 drink that has alternative milk. Not all 3. They're all regular size. That should be less than $20. You guys are feeling this, right? I woke up in that moment. I was like, oh yeah, it's 2024. I remember. The cost of living is insane. You would have seen the interview on Four Corners with the Woolworths CEO and an ABC journalist. And ABC's accusing the top 2 supermarkets in Australia for price gouging, where businesses take advantage of their market power and increase the cost of their products more than the cost that it actually makes, the cost to make them, the cost of production. You felt that in your grocery bill, right? You go to a supermarket. I will not name any supermarkets. You're there for a quick shop, just a few items, You beep, 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 check out, look into your bag, the one bag, and it's $100 for those few items. It's crazy. It's very hard in our day to get bang for your buck. And I wonder whether you're feeling that pinch. I wonder whether you're feeling that it's hard to get bang for your buck, not just in your financial space, but in life in general. Does it feel like life isn't enough? Work isn't enough. Being a parent isn't enough. Being married is not enough. The weekends aren't enough. How often do you feel full in life? How often do you feel full in life? Here's a story that Sue just read out to us. Here's a story where people feel full. They get a bang for their buck, a free lunch. And we see Jesus satisfies with leftovers. And so in this passage, I think Matthew, the big idea in this passage, Matthew is showing us that Jesus alone can really satisfy in life. Jesus alone can really satisfy. That's where we're going. And there's a bunch of questions that we can have, and I want to walk us through. I've called this, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Anyone remember the Rolling Stones? Yeah. I wanted to think about some good music. No, I'm kidding. I can't get no satisfaction. There's a bunch of questions I've got about Jesus and satisfaction, whether Jesus really does provide for us. Does he really care? Can he really satisfy? Number 2, how is he able to do it? Can he do it? And is his satisfaction enough? Is it enough? That's our 3 kind of questions today. So I'm going to unpack this text with you. We'll start point 1, question 1, does he really care? And I want to look at verses 13 and 14 with you in some detail. I'm just going to reread it. Sue did an amazing job. I just want to take us quickly to these places again. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, what's happening here? Well, apparently, Jesus has just heard about the horrific circumstances around John the Baptist's death, namely his beheading at an extravagant and exclusive drunken orgy of Herod Antipas. Herod's throwing this party. He was a ruler in the 1st century, a ruler over a particular area, the area where Jesus spent most of his ministry, teaching and doing things. He was the ruler for about 42 years. We call him and know him as King Herod. And he'd ordered John the Baptist's head to be removed because John had criticized Herod publicly for running off with his brother's wife. Herod was meant to be having a nice weekend away with his brother and his family, and he came home with his brother's wife. And so John, this prophet, this forerunner to Jesus, critiques Herod publicly for this, and Herod has his head. And so we're told Jesus hears this news, and we're told he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Just notice the detail that we have here is very interesting. How clear it is that Jesus really wants some alone time. Imagine a friend, we're told he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Imagine you had a friend called you up, hey Matt, I'm going away for a few days. I've hired a boat. I'm going by myself to a place where there is nowhere, somewhere up the Hawkesbury River, let's say. You would not think, I wonder if they want me to go with them. I wonder if they want some company. No, Jesus wants some alone time. He's tired. He's grieving the loss of his friend. He needs some space. Interesting, all the other Gospels that talk about this include the disciples with him. And the commentators tell us that the disciples' presence is presumed. It's always presumed in Matthew when Jesus speaks of traveling. So they're with him as well. Jesus wants some alone time. That could tell us many things about Jesus and his humanity and what it is for Jesus to be human. I think just a quick lesson there. It's okay to be solo for a time. It's okay to get away with some loved ones, some friends. There's time in life where you need to get out of the social space and into the God space and take whatever's going on for you to God and to a few important people. It's completely okay. Jesus did it. Moving on. So he's trying to escape. He's trying to be alone, away from people. But what do we read? Hearing of this, the crowds followed him. Bummer. And they follow him on foot from the towns. Bummer. And it says this, when Jesus landed, that is a very technical term for the moment when you disembark a boat. The moment Jesus' foot hits the ground, he's surrounded by the paparazzi. They're a little bit like Taylor Swift in Surry Hills on Tuesday night. Give the woman some space. He needs some space. But when he sees it, how does he respond? It says he had compassion on them and healed their sick. This is amazing. There is a picture here straight into the heart of God that you and I need to see this morning because we don't see it enough, perhaps. Perhaps we know it's true, but we don't believe it like we should. Matthew is pulling back the curtains on Jesus' heart, pulling away at all of our misconceptions that we have of God, and he's saying that your God is always a compassionate God. Your God is always compassionate. And the immediateness of his response, he sees them, he steps off the boat, he sees them, and what? He has compassion. The immediateness of the response tells us this is his instinct. What emotion is triggered in him when he sees a crowd is compassion. This is what comes most naturally for Jesus' compassion. You need to hear that. This is not true of me. I don't know about you. And I hope I'm exaggerating a little bit when I say this. I think I'm probably the worst in our office. I work for a church. I'm a pastor. I'm a pretty terrible example of Jesus' compassion. If you interrupt me in the office, my gut response, my immediate reaction, my instinct is not compassion. I wish it were. It's crankiness. That's what you get from Matt Straw. Not his best moments. But if you interrupt me, you get cranky. If you interrupt Jesus, you get compassion. Compassion is defined as, it literally means to suffer together. And emotional researchers describe it as the feeling that arises when you're confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. That's how Jesus feels. Notice there is zero begrudging in this text. Jesus doesn't turn up later with his disciples. He's like, are you kidding me? Did you see that? That was the worst. He doesn't complain. He doesn't let out a groan as he steps off the boat. Okay, if I have to. No, his instinct is compassion. Jesus is always, forever, only moved by compassion. He's forever moved by compassion. Jesus, filled with compassion, the Bible says, heals the sick. Jesus, filled with compassion, gives sight to the blind. Jesus, filled with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched a man, saying, I am willing, be clean. Jesus, filled with compassion, when he sees a widow whose only son has died, raises that boy to life. And here in Matthew 14, when Jesus sees this crowd, he's filled with compassion and he heals their sick. There's an application for us this morning. I hope you've heard it. This is your God. He is a God of compassion. This is true. This is your God. And he's a God of compassion. You know, when Moses asks to see God, this is in the Old Testament, thousands of years before Jesus, Moses, the prophet, the leader of God's people, says, God, I want to see you. And God says, yeah, I'll pass by. You can see my back, whatever that means. But he says, listen to what I say. And God goes past him. And what does he say? He passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. You know, if someone were to ask you, tell me 5 things about your God. Like, it's a weird conversation. I know it doesn't happen every week. But if someone came up to you, tell me 5 things about God. What is the first thing that comes to mind? Tell me about him. Tell me about his character. What's the first thing? Is it he's compassionate? He cares about people's suffering. Matthew is making absolutely clear to us that Jesus is our God who is first and foremostly full of compassion. You know, what does that mean for you? It means he's available. It means the door to his office is always open for you, and he doesn't begrudge you coming in. He's approachable. He wants you to come to him. He's never interrupted or inconvenienced by you. You have his attention, and more than that, his gut instinct towards you is always compassion. You need to hear that. I want you to turn to your neighbor for a moment because I want you to talk about this. Here's a question for you to reflect on. You could also, I'll have compassion on you. You can also just talk about the weather if this is too uncomfortable. But if you knew that God's first and foremost feeling toward you was compassion, how would that change how you come to him? Can you take 30 seconds? I'm timing. 30 seconds. Cool. That's time. You can continue that later. Does anyone want to give me something from the floor? How would it change? Yeah. You'd go quicker to God. If you knew he had compassion, you'd go quicker. Love it, Britt. Thank you. Approach God without fear. Thanks, Sue. So good. Relieves guilt? Yeah. You're like, he's not coming with a hammer first. He's coming with compassion. He's more open. He's open. That's so good. You know, I often think, thank you so much, Lottie. I often think we think his first feelings towards us are disappointment or disgust. You know, we think he sees us in need. We come to him needy. And he's like, are you serious? I thought you were more mature, Matt. Or get over it, Matt. Have you seen what I went through? Or I think often we think he's deaf to us. That's not important, Matt. Come on. You're asking for that? Or he's dead to us. Oh, that guy. Here he comes again. God is none of that. Jesus is compassionate. So, does he care? Yeah, he really cares. Secondly, how is he able to satisfy? Verses 15 through to 18. I'll read 15 to 17 out. If you've got your Bible, have a look. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking 5 loaves and 2 fish, looking up into heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people, and they all ate, were satisfied. I think there are 2 things in the immediate reading of this text that do not make sense. One is Jesus presumably points the finger at them and says, "You give them something to eat." I mean, what? What's he playing at? Is that some kind of crude joke? If the miracle in a moment stands to tell us that Jesus is able, then his word to them here is a reminder to them that they are unable. That's what's happening. I think what's happening here is we're seeing that there's a lesson that's primarily for the disciples in this moment. It's not for the crowd, it's for them to realize that they are not able. In John and Mark's gospel, we're told someone had quickly done the calculations. Mathematics, not maths. Better than maths. And they figured out, it says at the end of the passage there in verse 21, it says 5,000 men were there besides women and children. And all the commentators think there's probably most likely women and children there too. And we're talking between something like, considering all the size of families in the day, anywhere between 20,000 and 40,000 people. Maybe even more. To put it in terms that you can visualize, that you'll understand, about half a Taylor Swift concert. And Philip says, Jesus, to feed all these people, it's going to cost like half a year's worth of work, like 200 denarii for everyone just to have a bite to eat. In catering terms today, we're probably thinking about $250,000 to feed that many people. And that's a minimum spend. He's asking them to do next to the impossible. They cannot feed all of these people. And so why does he say this? Well, the point is, like I said, to draw our attention to the disciples, to draw them into the action, to say the reality is that you do not have all the resources to help all of these people. They don't have it. They're not able by themselves to serve these people. There's a reality here about Christian discipleship, about following Jesus, about being a part of his church, about serving his people, about sharing the gospel, about caring for those in need. You will always feel inadequate. You will always feel inadequate. You do not have within yourself and what seems like enough for all of the need. I'd love to tell you there's something significant about the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, that's a special number or something, it means something. I think the only thing significant about it is it's probably exactly what they were looking at. And gosh, they remember. There was 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's all we had. Maybe this is only a nightmare I've had. I have been a part of, back in the day when I was a young man, I used to put on conferences, help as a conference coordinator on a team, and we'd be responsible for providing food for like 20,000 people. And you do have the nightmares, like the night before. You're lying in bed and your subconscious is just doing what it always does, and you see this crowd of people all coming to be fed, and you think, I forgot to confirm with the caterer, or they're lining up at the trestle tables, and you look down at the food that's there and you're like, this can't be enough. And you said, I told you there were 20,000 people, 20K, and they 20K? I heard 20 cakes. That's my own little joke. I thought that was funny. But that feeling of anxiety when you're looking at the task, the Christian task in front of you, whatever it is, your service, and that feeling, that visceral reaction you have when your stomach is free-falling through to your feet, anxiety and fear has suddenly taken hold. Jesus is grabbing that moment for the disciples. That's why he's saying, you feed them. Because he's saying, in that moment, I want you to remember what's about to happen. I want you to remember this, that if you only look at what you have to share, your resources, you will always say, Jesus, we don't have enough. If you only look at what you have, you'll say, I don't have enough. In your own strength, in your own resources, by your own efforts, you don't. Perhaps you've been asked, perhaps you've put your hand up to be a part of a ministry team. Perhaps you've been commissioned as a community group leader. Perhaps you're serving at Mardi Gras Outreach next weekend. Maybe there's a one-on-one conversation you want to have with someone. Maybe God's put it on your mind and your heart to provide practically for someone in need. When push comes to shove, when the moment actually comes, I'm sure you know these moments. You'll look at the size of the task and you'll look at what you have and you will feel inadequate. And you are inadequate unless you bring it to Jesus. That's the turning point in this passage. That's the second part. That's the thing we're seeing here. How is Jesus able? The disciples are unable, but they bring it to Jesus. Why is that significant? In all four Gospels, there are only 2 miracles that are covered by all 4. Only 2 miracles that Jesus did that are covered by all 4. The resurrection of Jesus from the dead and the feeding of the thousands, this one. That maybe tells us, yes, it is true that the way to a man's heart is really through food. And they just remember, we remember the day Jesus gave lunch. So good. I think there's probably another point, and that is that this is really, 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 really significant. It's saying that Jesus is more than a nice guy. It's saying he's able to satisfy. Let me look at these verses 18 to 20 on the screen there in depth for you. I just want to go through all the different phrases really quickly. We're going to look at some technical terms in here, some Old Testament allusions, because I want you to see the picture that is being painted about who Jesus is and what is happening in this moment. Because it should blow away all your guilt, all your fear. It should make you run to him and come to him quickly. It says this, number 1. Verse 19, he said, bring them here to me, he said. Verse 19, he directed the people to sit down on the grass. To sit down, that is a pretty formal term. It's the term used in the Greco-Roman world to be seated as a guest at a dinner table, and actually not just at a dinner table, at a banquet. And so this suggests what's happening here is not just a picnic, but a festival. This is a party. This is a big moment. This is a huge party where people are actually dining in style. That's what's being referenced by sit down. It says sit down on the grass. Mark and John's gospel record it as green grass. I think there's 2 reasons why they would have recorded this. One, because it's the surface they were standing on. I feel like that's a bit of redundant detail. Thanks for letting us know it was green grass, Matthew. It's like important space. But the other reason is because in the Old Testament, God is referred to. The Lord, Psalm 23, the Lord is our shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I am full, because he makes me lie down in green pastures. And here is this man literally making the people lie down in green pastures. And so this is more than a garden party, it's God's party, and he's throwing the party. That's what we're seeing here. And then, verse 19, still looking up into heaven, he gave thanks. It's very normal. Christians even do it today. They say thanks before a meal, before eating. In the Jewish time, it wasn't anyone who said thanks or said grace. It was one person. It was the head of the household. Jesus is positioning himself as the head of this new community. And so we have this party. It's God's promised party. Jesus is throwing that party. He's the head of the party. He's the reason for the party. They're his people at this party. And we're told, how's the party happen? Verse 19, then we are told he broke the loaves. There's something in that detail. The way in which the people are fed is by Jesus breaking bread. It's interesting how all 4 verbs going through this passage, taking the loaves, breaking it, or taking the loaves, giving thanks, breaking it, and giving it, is exactly how all 4 Gospels record the Last Supper. This is a picture of the meal that Christians have taken since the night before Jesus died, still continue to take today, and will take until Jesus returns, to remind us that the way in which God's people are spiritually fed is by Jesus' broken body. They all ate and are satisfied. There's the miracle. 5 loaves, 2 fish, feed 5,000, possibly tens of thousands of people. Zooming out, what does that remind you of? You just look at that picture, this bread just miraculously appearing. There's, a Jewish reader would not have missed the Old Testament allusions. There's a few of them, but namely, probably the biggest one is the manna in the desert. When God's people had escaped the tyranny of Egypt and walked on foot into the wilderness, and God had provided food for them from heaven, bread from heaven. And this new community is established around God as he reveals himself to them, as they worship him, as they're satisfied by him alone. I don't think it would have taken a few bites for someone to be like, hang on, this has happened before. This is that happening again. And what's that pointing to? It's saying, Jesus, this is your God. This is him. Why? How can he provide bread from heaven? It's because this is Yahweh. This is God. This is the God that has always provided for you, always does and always will. This is him. The divine nature of Jesus Christ is being seen in this moment. That's what you need to see. He is the Son of God, and that's why he can provide for you. This is also in that picture, if that's true, if Jesus is God in the midst of his people, this is not just a picture of the past or a picture of this one-off little moment in the first century. This is a picture of what's coming in the new heavens and new earth. This is a picture of the kingdom of heaven. This is a picture of the future. Matthew 8, Jesus said, I say to you that many will come from east and west and will take their places at the feast of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of God. In other words, this is a picture of the future. This party that happened in the first century on some unknown hill is a picture of the great party that we can all know and experience when the kingdom of God arrives in full, when men, women, and children will finally be seated as guests of honor at God's table in his house with him as the host, eating a meal that satisfies your every need. Jesus, the Son of God, has turned up to do that. Our last little question is, does he really care? Yep. How's he able? He's the Son of God. Is it enough? Can Jesus give me enough? Can he really satisfy my needs? We've mentioned it a few times, but they all ate and were satisfied. That's amazing, isn't it? It wasn't like 5 loaves and 2 bread were split up into all their little atoms and everybody was given a token amount. No, they're satisfied. There were people saying, enough, like I'm full. I'm already in food coma state. Leave me alone. It says there were 12 basketfuls of broken bread. Could be wasteful. On the other hand, perhaps it's saying something. Maybe the 12 is in reference to the 12 tribes in Israel, and Jesus is saying, I have enough for everyone. Maybe it's 12 because there's 12 disciples, and Jesus is, remember, this is a lesson for them. I have enough for you, and we'll have enough not just for today, but for tomorrow's work as well. But let me finish really by asking 2 questions, because I think there are 2 questions about is it enough really, and how does God provide, that we need to answer. Firstly is, Matt, why doesn't Jesus supply all of my needs now? I think that's a question all of us are asking. You read this passage, it's about God supplying our needs. Matt, does Jesus supply all my needs today? Will Jesus provide for all my needs now? Now, let me say, of course, if you're here asking that this morning, and many of us are, it's not merely an intellectual question, it's a question you feel. And maybe you're disappointed with God about something in particular. Maybe you're hurt, frustrated, let down. And that is a true and real experience. And so please just take what I say with a grain of salt. But my prayer is that it's some helpful food that you may need to feed on. Here's my stab at an answer. Why doesn't Jesus supply all my needs like this today? First thing we can say about this text is not about you. really it's about Jesus and these particular people on that particular day, and it's about his ability to satisfy. It's the first thing we can say. Secondly, Jesus didn't feed people every day. He didn't rock up with a food truck like the one that's coming to Vine Church in a few weeks' time. He didn't open a catering company. Out of the 1,000 days that he did his ministry, on 2 days he does a miracle like this. The point of that is this is about something else, and we've talked about that. This is about what the kingdom of God will look like when the king comes to be his people in the future. He has not promised his people that they will go hungerless now. He will satisfy every hunger when he comes as king. That's what he promises. Let me just move forward in the New Testament from Matthew to see how the apostles understood what was happening here. I've got two passages for you, from one from Philippians and one from Romans. Two passages say that God will supply our needs, and that is a promise the Christian can hold on to. Philippians 4:19, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. Romans, he who did not spare his own son but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? That is God's promise to you. But what does it mean? What it cannot mean from the context of those two passages is that you will have the easy life that you want, or that you will never be hungry. Philippians 4:12 and Romans 8:38, in the same breath, Paul says Christians might find themselves, he has found himself well-fed and hungry, living in plenty and in want. That is a Christian experience. He also says trouble, hardship, persecution, or famine are things the Christian perhaps should expect to experience in this life. So what is him supplying our needs? What is that? From these passages, I think it's pretty clear. It's that he will give you everything you need to see Jesus as all you need. He will give you everything you need in order to be content in Jesus. To love and trust him. To live a life of godliness. To finish the race faithful to the end. God will supply that need. Christian, your needs will be supplied for. Christ will be enough, more than enough. And so you should pray to the God who loves to give good gifts to his children, but not assuming that every want you have is what you really need. I want to make one little application here, and that is a secondary application. That's how God provides for your needs. But secondly, how does he actually provide? How does he actually provide? There was a line I deliberately missed in that story. I deliberately missed it so we could talk about it here for a moment. Did you notice how Jesus distributed the food? Did you notice how he shared the food with all those people? It didn't drop from heaven. It didn't arrive in a little lunchbox in their pocket. It says, what does it say? He gave it to them. I don't know whether, no, I don't have it. He gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. He gave it to the disciples gave it to the people. That's tremendously important, that line. John Calvin, in his commentary on this passage, he says, Jesus gave them the loaves in order that in their hands the astonishing increase might take place and that they might thus be ministers of Christ's divine power. Christ determined that his power should be handled by them. I think in part what he's saying is that this is true for us today as well. Jesus uses us to make his things happen in the world. He uses us and the small things that we have, the 5 and the 2, the seemingly insignificant things that we have, if we bring them to Jesus, he's able to use them to do amazing things. We carry God's divine power in our actions, in our words to one another. God uses us. I mentioned the band at the beginning. That wasn't just an offhanded comment. I was thinking about how I could share with this congregation how God's grace in its various forms is communicated to one another. I might invite the band up because we're about to sing about Jesus. But, I heard Kate playing the drums. I don't know whether she's here. She'll have to come back. I'm sure is she coming? Yeah, anyway. Did you hear her play the kind of second part of that chorus in double time? It was amazing. I was like, in the way that we serve one another, band, you can come up. Yeah, come up, take your place. In the way that we serve one another, we don't just grab what we have and go, this isn't enough. I'm not sure I'll do anything with it. Liv doesn't ask Kate to share her gift with us, and then Kate just kind of prays that someone will play the drums. Kate practices. She learns how to do double time. And then she gets up here on a Sunday morning for 2 services and she plays that double time beat so that you and I will feel it. What small thing do you have that God is asking you to share? By way of conclusion, this passage is actually meant to mirror the passage that came before it, Herod's banquet. Here we have Herod's banquet, Herod's party, and here we have Jesus' party. And I want to finish just by landing on this point. How can you trust that Jesus will satisfy? How can you trust that he's the one? We're meant to compare and contrast the two parties. Here you have a king who apparently has everything, a palace, power, an important place in society. He has everything the world offers, but his party ends in death. But here you have another king, compassionate, uses his power to serve, who breaks his life, what he has, to give you life and life to the full. He cares for you. His immediate response to you is to have compassion. He's able to provide for your every need. He's your good shepherd that makes you lie down in green pastures. He's your good king who gives life. Let's stand and sing together.